here to talk about the basics of writing fiction. Most of this will probably sound kind of common sensey, but I've learned over the years and through experience that sometimes just saying things, even the obvious things over and over can't help. Also, usually I speak to beginners. So that's one of the reasons why I was asking about where y'all were going at this. So I guess we'll get going. So when I was looking into this recently, one of the first things, and this is why I say you have to start with things you have to say over and over, that people that I read on and on again about the importance of writing is that it needs to be on a schedule. If you are planning to write something, you need to allocate time for it, and you need to use that time that you have allocated for it so that you can get your writing done. Because repetition makes a habit. Habit makes things repeatable. Repeatability will carry you until you are done. Now, depending on how far you're trying to go with your writing, I have heard from if you're trying to be a professional writer who's big name in Barnes and Noble, you need to be writing 5,000 words a day. 5,000 words a day is a lot. If you are working on independently and selling your books on Amazon, the number I've heard is generally about half of that, 2,500 to 3,000. And I'm going to say right now that is a bit of a tall order, because if you can write 1,000 words in a story in an hour, you are considered writing at a professional writer's speed. So now I'm assuming that y'all here have other obligations, so me suggesting that y'all block out 3 to 5 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, is probably a bit of a tall order. That's okay. That's just the furthest end when it comes to writing. When it comes to being a habit, what it takes to get it done, the most common thing I hear when I talk to people about writing schedules who also have other lives is they do it during their lunch breaks. They have a 1 hour lunch break. They can eat their lunch in 30 minutes. They take the other 30 minutes. They get their writing. Any questions?
So when you say schedule out time every day,
We're going to second for the door shut. Sorry, y'all. No worries. Glad you could make it.
So when you say block out time every day for your writing, what would you say for somebody that blocks out that time but they don't necessarily have the inspiration in that moment?
So that is a great time to learn how to write without inspiration, because inspiration is writing with only inspiration is a bit of a trap. Because now, if you're planning to casually write, this is a little less stringent, but if you're talking writing, you've set a goal, you have this story of your book you want to get done, and you wanted to get done by X day, or if you manage to find a publisher, you need to have it by this X date, otherwise you owe them money. Waiting for the muse to strike will rarely be able to get the workflow you need to complete your project in the amount of time that you need. Writing without inspiration, I mean, pretty much the only pointers I have for that is disconnect from the internet, because if you're like me and easily distractible, if you can shut off, if you can minimize those distractions, sometimes it helps your mind go okay, okay, I can't scroll on TikTok until I get 500 words done. So, and then next thing you know, you've gotten 1,000 done. That's what I would recommend, sort of towards that, because, and also as you partake in this, when it comes to writing without inspiration, the one thing I cannot emphasize enough is when you first start, it is going to be a drag, because it's like, I don't want to do this, but I need to do this, and then push yourself to do it, because one thing that often happens is once you start getting going, your brain kicks into gear. And that way you're not threatening the muse with, like, you're gonna have to eat Vienna sausage for the next month if this doesn't get done, or things like that. Helpful?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions about writing, scheduling before I move on to the next thing? All right. Thank you. All right. So next I'm going to talk about, now when it actually comes down to writing, there's two broadest camps of writing. They're commonly called. There's discovery writing, and then there's outlining. Often called plotting and pantsing, because we like things that start with the same letter. Pantsing, discovery writing, it makes sense when you hear about it. What it is you sit down, and when you write your story, you don't know what's going to happen next. You're just sitting down and you're like, okay, I'm going to just see where the words take me. The plotting is where, before you sit down and write, you make an outline. It can be as detailed or as broad as you want it. Pretty much, so that way when you sit down, it's like, okay, I'm going to take what's on this outline and I'm going to make it into a readable story. There is nothing wrong with either form. If you have a preference for writing with, sometimes I get tongue-tied, I stop and correct myself. If you need an outline to get your story done, great, do it. If you don't, okay, good. The reason I bring this up is because knowing what kind of writer you are and where you fall on this is super important to getting it done. Because what happens when you're not writing the way that your brain is actually geared, is you wind up losing productivity, and you wind up stressing yourself out more. For outliners, if you really need an outline, you sit down, you're like, okay, I have no idea what's going to happen. It can induce stress. It can make things more difficult. You generally write slower. If you're a discovery writer, you sit down, you drew up an outline, you start writing. You don't need to write it. You already wrote it down over here. So this is one, and the best way to find out where you fall on the spectrum is try both. Or if you're already doing one way, try the other. Now, one thing I will say, if I had more set up time, I might have set my iPad to draw this, but when I say plotting and I say pantsing, these are not mutually exclusive ways of writing. It is on a spectrum. You can, and also, if you decide you're one, you are not until the end of time committed to that form of writing in all cases at all times. You can decide you're a discovery writer, but you want to know where your general direction where you're storing, so you make a very broad outline, and then you fill in and then you make up the connecting points in between as you go. You can have a hard outline. You can look at it and it's like, I'm not feeling this, and you go off and you you make up something else and go for a bit, and then you're like, okay, we'll go back to the outline. Like, you can do whatever you're most comfortable doing, and also in the specific time that you are doing it. One word of caution though is, if you are a discovery writer, one of the big pitfalls with that is usually when it comes time to end your story, if you're discovery writing, sometimes you just don't know where to end it. It just keeps going, or it runs out of steam and before it reaches the climax. And who's read a book that's felt like it ended 100 pages ago? That is most likely discovery writing gone awry. If you want to, the example I always bring to this of discovery writing gone wrong is the Song of Fire and Ice, Game of Thrones book series. It's kind of tapered off. George R.R. Martin clearly tapped out after the 5th book, but it wasn't done. And if it ever gets done, I will be surprised, just as surprised as everyone else. When it comes to plotting, the biggest downfall with that is you commit too hard to your outline. Because sometimes, as you're writing with an outline, something starts to feel like it's not connecting right as you read it further. And what I recommend when you're doing that is going back and reevaluating what you've written and seeing if you need to change the direction your story's going and rewrite your outline. What the worst case scenario that can happen is, instead you plow ahead with that outline. We're going to reach the end, no matter what we're going to get there. My example of the most prominent example of an outline writing that has gone wrong is the Game of Thrones television series. This is something I saw. Generally, also in books, if you read it, okay, who's read a book? Man, this book started really awesome. Man, this book ended really awesome. Boy, was it really boring in the middle. Yeah. Usually what happens is what that is a sign of, not always, is that an outliner had this awesome story idea, they had this awesome climax idea, and they didn't know how to connect it, so they just forced it. All right, do I have questions on discovery or outlining? Yes?
When it comes to forming the ending in discovery, like how do you know when enough is enough?
So the surefire way is your test readers should be able to signal that. But for yourself, stories usually start up, they begin with, this incident has happened. Somebody kicked a cat, you want to find out who. So the resolution of your story is you found out who kicked the cat, and they're brought to justice. So when they're brought to justice, sometimes there's there's the winding down to the story a bit from there to also tie up loose ends, but it's when you have resolved your central conflict, that is when it's time to start bringing your story down. When everything is resolved, that is when it's time to end. Also, one thing to look out for when doing this is artificially inflating your story, padding it. Not most commonly seen in anime when they have to give the authors 6 months to a year to catch up with the story. Sometimes authors just do it on their own without that. So if whether or not you're padding your story is also something that you have to judge yourself, and also have somebody who's reading your story to proof it, to give feedback on as well. And also, I recommend multiple people giving feedback, because if one person tells you that the climax of your story was boring, that is a sign that one person found it boring. If 10 people tell you that the climax of the story was boring, that is a big sign, a much bigger sign that something needs to be reworked. The ratio I've heard is, and this is like 10 people. If it's less, you just have to make a judge call on how much you trust them. Is if 7 out of 10 readers are okay and buy into what you have done, then you have crossed a threshold, in that you may, even if it wasn't like the best choice, you didn't make a wrong choice in your writing. Anyone else? Yes.
I guess it kind of isn't necessarily. It's more this. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how to word your question. How would you go about trying to write like a world building? So not the actual like plot point, and if you're trying to figure out the world you want to put the characters in, how do you go about?
World building is probably the best use of plotting out there, because even if you plan to go into that world with your character and not know what's going to happen, if you have set rules for that world ahead of time, you know outcomes for when certain situations happen. Like, don't walk, like if the Wizard of Oz, don't walk through the poppy seeds. So yeah, it's pretty much just like, okay, in this world, you can write brief points about history points, or if you're messing with the physics or making rules of magic. And what that does is, when things get going, it saves you, or makes it less likely that when you reach a point, you look at what you've written, you look back at like 100 pages and realize, oh, this is either going to have to be retconned or a major overhaul. Yes.
I heard that when you're world building like that and you're setting it up like that if you have those rules and then you're writing, then you don't have to do your exposition on it. You just let the rules show up organically.
Yes. That I agree. And one thing I would also add to that is to also be aware of when something isn't meshing up, because you can always change the rules to your world as long as you're keeping them consistent throughout. For example, if I walk into a room and I open the door outwards, and then I leave the room and I come back and I open the door inwards, If it's close enough together, or if somebody's nitpicky and reading it a second time, readers catch that, and they'll be like, oh, this guy wasn't. Oh, the best case is like, oh, this guy's setting up some plot twist with that little detail. But if you weren't, they're like, oh, this guy was just not paying attention to himself. So, and that's what to say. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right. So next I'm going to talk briefly a bit about the rules of writing. This is one of my favorite things, and it's probably going to go be a little quicker this time. What are rules to writing that people have heard? Or is it?
Show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell. Anyone else? Let's see here. Who? Yes.
Start out with your inciting incident if you possibly can, or immediately get to it as quick as you can.
Yes, and that is more commonly called hook the reader. That has to do with that has to do a little bit with shrinking attention spans, because while you can still do slow burns, if it's just a slow burn, you have a risk of losing a fight with TikTok these days. Let's see here. Another example of a rule that I have heard is adverbs are the enemy. Reason I've heard that one is because what it's is the English language has many verbs, and usually when an adverb shows up, it's because somebody picked a weak verb, and rather than pick a stronger verb, they just slapped a very in front of it. When, like, for example, he ran very fast instead of he sprinted. And the big reason to keep an eye out for this is because if you can express an idea with fewer words, it's generally considered better for and by readers. The reason I bring these rules up is because one of the other rules, that I hear from time to time, is that there are no rules to writing. And there is some truth to that, because we hear stories every now and then about people who get 18, 19, pour their heart and soul into like 3 100,000 word books or whatever, and they go to a publisher, it is published, they make millions, and they are set, and they have no formal training in writing fiction ever. So that is rare. If you are one of those rare people, congratulations. For the record, I am not one of those people. But the reason that I bring this up is because when you hear all these rules about writing, it's because they're all in service of a central idea of you want to keep your reader reading. And this is important because especially if somebody's reading something you've written and they've said that it's boring. Well, okay, how do I keep them reading? Unfortunately, the phrase by itself is so broad that it is essentially meaningless, and that's where we get show don't tell, because that keeps readers' attention more. That's where we get condense your words and pick stronger verbs. Avoid adverbs, and that's where we get hook them at the start. Now, this brings me to what I say my second rule of writing is and that is you need to be able to enjoy what you are writing. If you are slaving away at a book, chasing a trend that so many vampire romances fell off a cliff in the late 20 teens. There is a risk of just not having fun with it, burning out, and then just giving up on writing altogether or taking an extended break. You need to be able to enjoy the stories you are creating as you create them. The one caveat with that is if you're editing, that goes out the window, because editing is one of the most tedious aspects of writing craft out there, and you just have to get down there and you have to do it and you have to redo it. If you are editing a story and are not sick of reading it, it may be time to take one more read over it. All right, do I have any questions about the rules of writing? Yes.
So something that you said that kind of made me think of the question is like, what about, sorry, when you talk about enjoying what you're writing, like, I don't know if you meant more broad of like the subject matter or more so like the process of it, but I think it kind of ties into what you talked about before as far as like plotting and discovery. How would you go about somebody that struggles with pacing their writing? I know I want this to happen. I know kind of how I want it to get there, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how can I pace it properly to keep somebody's attention?
So, if there is an interesting point you want to get to, the quickest way to get to it without just hard cut and now it's happening is through the character's motivations. Readers read your work through the perspective of the main character or main characters, and they pick up on how a character is interacting with the world, and often how they are struggling with the story that is going on. If readers attach to your character or characters and understand their motivations, or have a glimpse of them, they will ride or die with them. And even worse with low stakes. Like, this is one of my favorite examples. Who has seen? Oh gosh, if I haven't been trying to think of it, who's seen the movie with the emotions start with Inside Out 1 and Inside Out 2. The climax, I have spoilers for Inside Out 2, the movie's been out for a while. The climax of Inside Out 2 is Riley is having her first panic attack. Now, because the movie has been building up her teenage angst all movie long, I am on the edge of my seat. It's like, oh my goodness, is this teenager about to run her future and have a complete and total meltdown? And that's because of the character motivations. Because as I just described it, yes, panic attacks, especially when you're younger and figuring out the world, are common. You work through them, and then as you get older, you're able to deal with emotions better and look back on them, and it's like, this one panic attack, this one day, would most likely have not run this one person's future. But because I was taught that, because in this case, because I understood her emotions very well, because there are characters in that, and I understood how Riley was acting while in there. I was invested in how she would, in the outcome of her panic attack. Now, and it comes to how do you get readers attached to characters, because this is getting to broad. That is unfortunately something that I would have to like see what you're writing to talk with through, because it's individualized. Because I mean, sometimes people like to read characters that are really nice. Sometimes people follow along jerks until the end. It's all over the place. I would need to know about your character and the story they are going through. Any other questions? No worries. Let's see here. This is one of the last things. Now, one of the most important things about the craft of writing is editing. Very few people have been divined the gift to drink 3 cappuccinos, sit down at a computer, hammer out 50,000 words in 13 hours, and have a New York bestseller. And if anybody can do that, first off, I would advise against that, because that sounds very unhealthy. And second of all, that does not sound like something that would be quite repeatable. So what that means is we have to go back through our stories and make sure that we wrote what we meant to write, and we wrote it in the clearest way that we believe so. Somebody I've learned to talked about, this problem arises because there's the story in our head, and then there's the story that we're writing on the page. We think that they are the same story. They are rarely, if ever, the same story. One resembles the other, but usually you have to make compromises. You either have to make compromises because, I guess, to rag on George R.R. Martin again a little bit, I don't want to read 2,000 words about the description of a banner. I'm sorry, I don't. And the other thing is, if you have things in your mind and your readers are not picking up on those things, then that means that there's something in your mind that you presumed made it to the page but did not. So to go about that, first there is giving feedback, because good authors should read a lot. Good authors should help other authors read authors through with their books. When it comes to giving feedback, the core advice that I have is, first and foremost, be descriptive, not prescriptive. Now, to give an example of that is, earlier when I said, I think this climax is boring. That is not something that can be wrong. I have described my reaction to this book. Part of this is also being able to say where you got lost in the book or in the writing. Usually, I would say, if you're doing this and you're reading something and you're realizing you're forcing yourself to read it rather than just reading it, you need to mark that place, because something pretty close to there has probably dropped the ball for you. And you also need to be able to just, because saying I'm bored that is descriptive, but you need to be able to go into more details about why you were bored with this. Like, he just sat there and I didn't know what was going on. Climax had him around it. He wasn't invested in it, I wasn't invested in it. If you're now, the reason to avoid prescription, unless you know this person really well that you're reading for, and even then, after you go through the prescriptives, is let's say I am writing a vampire romance novel. I read it, I rate it, I give feedback, and in my feedback, I say, I believe this book would work better as a werewolf vampire romance. Would it? Because what's happening here is instead of describing your reaction to the page and what you believe, is that most times is you're often trying to superimpose your vision of the book onto your vision of their book onto their writing, instead of trying to help them get their mind book or their voice onto the page the best way you believe how. Now, like I said, if you know this person really well, you can be prescriptive in certain ways. If you are proofreading for a stranger, or if you're like in a writing group or in a class and just working for it, stick with mainly the descriptive things. Now, also I have to say, always try to look for the positives and point out the positives where you can. This is super important because we don't want to be jerks. I mean, even if they wrote the most boring, typo-filled book that they've ever handed to you, if there's you need to tell them that I was bored and this was filled with typos and those typos strung me up. But also at the same time, it's like, hey, this scene, if you clean up the typos, really worked for me. You need to be able to boost people where possible. So one, you're not discouraging to them, and two, you generally want to have people come back to you for help again. Be the positive change you want in the world. But also, if their book is boring, typo-filled mess, don't be so nice that you say nothing about that. Okay, do I have questions about giving and receiving feedback? Okay. Usually when this happens, I either have to think I either blew it out of the park wonderfully, or man, this was just awful, move on.
No, go ahead. I'm his mother. I'm his mother, so.
Yeah, anyway. Do you have a question? Okay, question.
Oh, I was gonna say, so marketing term for different styles of writing, genres, what kind of books? I mean, I'm still trying to figure out. I'm a amateur writer. I was a teacher for many years. So how do you figure out what? I mean, I read everything, and I sit down to write a story, and I've written alternate history. I have written romantasy. I'm in the midst of a military science fiction.
All right. Do you want me to give the generic answer, or do you want me to give the answer specific to you?
Well, give a generic answer, and then you can tell me specific to me, because I mean.
Okay, so the generic answer is you're writing whatever you want. Now, when it comes time to pick a genre, that is the problem for the marketing team. Now, if most people are independent writers, unfortunately, that's your problem, but it's your problem later. You want your if you're writing a story, worry about you write the story you want, and then you put it, you classify it in the genre when it's done. I do not recommend shoehorning into a genre unless you really like writing into that genre, and you're like, yeah, sure. Specific to you, Mom. You are a romance writer. Everything you've written has romance angles to it.
Not that alternate history didn't.
Sure. And then the other way is your readers. You can also include, if you don't know what genre you've written into, you can also ask them, what genre do you think this is? And then once you figured out the big genre, then there comes the subgenres, which I will just say, don't worry about that, and just ask your test readers, what other genres does this fit in? Like, does this science fiction story have romance elements to it, and how strong are they?
Something else I heard is that now because our attention spans are so short, that mixing tropes is a better way to find your reader. Like if I have a military science fiction story, which I'm writing now, it doesn't really have romance in it, but it has seeds of romance in it.
There are pluses and minuses to this. The big thing in my experience, and maybe some people here will be able to confirm it, is when you hear that something has both elements of this and elements of that, you get a Venn diagram. And when you have the Venn diagram, your hope is that you get everyone. Because, oh yeah, this is a romance fantasy, and oh yeah, you like romance novels? Perfect. You like fantasy novels? Perfect. What has happened is, instead of getting everyone in this Venn diagram, you wind up with just the middle. You just get the people who are into both genres. I will say that the lines around that are blurry. I have, and while I don't know how many people, because I don't have number statistics, like I have personally, this has happened. It's like, oh, there's this superhero romance story. Oh, the romance stories aspects are a little too strong for me. Well, I mean, I guess it's sort of for me, but not enough. I'm gonna check out. So when it comes to mixing tropes, it's gonna have to come down to which tropes you are mixing. And honestly, romance is one of the worst examples, because almost everything has romance elements to it. I mean, Disney in the 90s, all the princesses found their princes. Many action movies, there are romance subplots to them. So like romance. So when I say romance, it just depends on how heavily you're going to lean into it. But personally, I think romance is one of the most mixable genres out there, because everybody's doing it already. It's just how far you lean into it. Okay, now for my final point, I am going to do a little bit of an exercise that I've been doing for a while now, and I always have fun with this. All right, I want everyone to imagine a new character right now. Like, new fiction character, just come up with it really quick. I'm going to ask for their name here in a second. Any names?
Yeah.
Jonathan. David?
Damien.
Damien.
Quince.
Quince. Ren. Ty.
Elaine.
Elaine.
Samantha.
Samantha. This is one. Hey, congratulations! You're the first conference I have presented to where everyone got to share their name. All right. So the reason I bring this up is because now I'm going to ask a few questions. Okay. So first, how many of your characters' names matched your personal gender that you identified by? 1, 2.5, 3. Next question. Okay, how many of your characters? Now this one I wish I had my iPad for. How many of your characters had the same in your character's name? How many letters in your name were also in your characters' names?
Oh, wait,
1, 2,
4.
4.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 3. And this is the last one. How many of your characters' names have the same number of syllables as your name? 1, 2, 3. So the reason I bring this up is because when it comes to writing, we are often writing ourselves, elements of ourselves into our work. And I bring this up because this is not something to avoid. It's something to be aware of because you want to know how much of yourself you are putting in, or the things you know you are putting into your work. Now, this came up once, so I have to always say it. This is not licensed to plagiarize, but because there is a difference between taking elements of your experience and using that to write out your story versus, I'm just going to cross out this name, put in this name, and call it a book. You can, it is okay to embrace your influence. My favorite example of this is, what is the main character's name in Star Wars 4, 5, and 6? Luke's last name. Luke Skywalker. What is the name of the creator of Star Wars? Oh, you caught on to it. What is the first letter of Skywalker's last name? S. So that makes Luke Skywalker Luke S. Congratulations, congratulations, you now know that one of the most popular, I guess technically he's a superhero, but he's more of a space opera folk hero, is a self-insert. Yeah. All right, so this is all that I have come prepared with. Now this is where I will answer any and all questions you have. Yeah. All right. Well, I will probably be around here for a little bit longer, so you can feel free to come up to me if you see me. Otherwise, have a great con. And I guess if I was to give one last advice is, one way to help influence your reading or influence your writing is to read books, because you can pick up on subtle writing techniques in books that you read, and that will also help you in finding your genre. Because if you're writing sci-fi all the time and don't know why your real world romance isn't working out, it's probably because the lack of romance books you're reading. All right. Thank y'all.